Thanks so much for having me into your world for 15 or 20 minutes or so. My name is Sascha and I'm here today to have a yarn with you on one of my most favourite topics, good enough parenting. Now I'm sure as I actually say those words, good enough parenting, that there might be a little bit of a reaction that you might be experiencing and thinking, well, that's certainly not good enough. But I'm going to go on to now and talk about why I think good enough parenting is actually perfect. So before we get started, just a little bit about me. As I said, my name is Sascha and I am a clinical psychologist. I've worked in the space of mental health and wellbeing for nearly 20 years now, and I've worked in a range of different settings, in a range of different locations across the country and across the world, working with a range of different people from kids to adults to parents and families. And there's always been that thread to my work, regardless of where I've landed, that my work is always centred around supporting families in one way or another. I have a commitment in my practice to both a holistic approach to understanding mental health and wellbeing, and I'll go on to share a little bit more of that as we go through the presentation today, but also what is inherent in the practice of a clinical psychologist is using science and data and evidence to inform the information that we share with the people that we work with. So that will be my reference today in terms of being able to communicate and share with you evidence-based information that can help guide you on your journey as a parent, so you can tune out some of the noise and focus on what really matters. So not only am I coming to you or talking with you today with my clinical psychologist hat on, but I'm also many things outside of being a clinical psychologist. I'm a mum to 4 little ones, I'm a partner, I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, I'm a friend, I run my own business, I also work for some other organisations. So I would like to think that there's probably a lot of similarities between you and I, and similarities in terms of our commitment to doing the best by our kids, being the best parents that we can be, whilst also wanting to meet our own personal goals for career and for work, for relationships, and for what we want to bring to our community. So this is a little snapshot of my family life. 4 kids, it's hard, and a partner, it's hard to get everyone in the same picture, but this gives you a sense of me and my reference point and what motivates me in my work in terms of doing the best by this little crew of people, because I know that the changes that we can make as parents in terms of our relationships with our kids not only helps us in our personal journeys, but I believe enables us to really contribute to changes intergenerationally or generationally, which will go on to have massive impacts across the world. Okay, so let's start by having a quick look at what I hope to cover in this class today. All centred around, as I said in the introduction, in the title of this class, which is providing an argument for why being a good enough parent is what we should be striving for. I'm going to provide you with some information around the science around this statement in terms of what actually really matters to our kids in their growing up and their development of resilience in particular, and some of the things that can maybe get in the way of some of these variables. And I hope that will also provide you with some information and some confidence in terms of also not only just showing up for your kids, but in doing so being able to prioritise your own needs and the importance of that. And then rounding that off with a bit of space and time for you to think about how you can use this information and take it into your daily life. Okay, so let's jump into things firstly by looking at what many years of research when I say many years, over decades of research in psychological science in particular has demonstrated is the most important variables in impacting our kids' development. And I really like this framework, which I'll just call the PUP framework for families, that really, in a really clear visual, tries to describe what's most important for us as parents in thinking about the development of our kids. So I think you would probably, I would suspect, agree with me that what we're wanting to do in terms of our kids' development, whether this is explicitly clear in our mind or something that we've just internalised and it isn't always at the forefront of our mind, but when we think about kids, I think what most parents are striving to do is hope that we can grow our kids up to be healthy and strong, that they are able to be able to settle themselves and focus their attention as they need to across their development, whatever that might look like, depending on how old they are, so that they can learn and they can achieve at school. We want them to participate in activities and be able to participate in activities from our own cultural group or from our community group in terms of song and dance and sport and movement. And we want our kids to be able to connect with others, to have strong and meaningful relationships both within their family and within the broader community. So that's what we're aiming for in terms of our kids' development, and I hope you're on the same page in terms of striving towards those targets, I suppose. What we know to be true, again, from a scientific point of view, is that there's a range of different variables that can impact our kids achieving those developmental outcomes. Number one is the unique temperament and biology of the little person that has chosen us to be their mum, their dad, their caregiver, their parent. And there's some of these things that we can't control for. Some kids are more sensitive than others. Some kids, and that means in terms of their reactivity to the environment, to people, to sounds, to noise, to taste, to smell. Some kids are, a bit more rambunctious and outgoing and risk takers compared to others, and maybe this is a bit of myself in there, that is a little bit more risk averse and a little bit more anxious. And these are all variables, again, that are very innate and very biologically driven, and you'll see, and I'm sure if you've got multiple kids, you'll see that there's often a lot of big differences in our temperament and our biology of our kids from child to child, and you might see that within your own family of origin as well. So what I would like to suggest that we're trying to do as parents is to maximise developmental outcomes for our kids, but taking into account their own innate ability and preferences, and this might also be for some kids particularly special needs to do with attention, to do with social skills in terms of how they process information. The next layer, and I'm going to really focus on two layers of this diagram today, and this is a point which I just find is so incredibly powerful. It can create a degree of pressure, but I'm going to talk to that in a moment to come. What we know to be true in terms of having the most impact on the developmental outcomes for our kids, what we can control outside of all those variables that I just mentioned, more biologically driven variables, the thing that has the most impact on our kids meeting their developmental potential is the quality of the relationship that they have with us as parents or as caregivers. And this is depicted on this framework in terms of two halves of the one whole. So this blue side of the circle at the top and the yellow at the bottom. And what this, these aspects, two halves of the one whole, represent or include in terms of our relationship with our kids is the capacity for our kids to feel loved, to feel nurtured, to feel safe, to feel warm within their family environment, and at the same time that they're in an environment that's predictable, that there's a level of routine and consistency and capacity to keep them safe. So I really just want to stress on this point that it's the quality of that relationship, or another way of describing this is the security of our relationship, our attachment relationship with our kids, that is most predictive of anything over anything else in terms of impacting our kids' development over time. Not only does the quality of our relationship impact our kids' ability to meet their developmental potential, but what it also does is it provides an incredibly powerful mechanism of protection and of building of resilience, so that our kids are able to navigate challenges in their life, which is inevitable, so that it gives them the skills and the ability to be able to navigate challenge. And what this can mean in terms of thinking way ahead into the future is if we have a secure attachment with that relationship with our child, or as close to that as possible, then we're likely to protect them from having significant mental health problems with drug and alcohol. We're going to maximise their learning capacity, their achievement at school, their occupational achievement later on in life. We're going to help promote stability of relationships and capacity to connect with others and have meaningful relationships. This is the power of the quality of our relationship with our kids. Okay, so this is the first really important point in then thinking about this concept of good enough parenting, which I will get to, is that a secure attachment relationship with our kids is the greatest predictor of positive developmental outcomes for our kids, because it both enables resilience and the skills to be able to navigate adversity. Okay, so now that we've got that as our basis, this is what I would suggest we need to be striving towards in terms of what's most foundational and fundamental to our role as parents, is developing a secure attachment relationship with our kids. And this might sound like a really clunky or complex sort of phrase, but it's actually really quite simple in terms of what our kids need from us in order to feel safe and secure in their relationship with us. We need to meet our kids' needs to both be and to feel safe, seen, soothed when they have big emotions, and putting all these three things together, they then feel secure. So that's how we enable security in our relationship with our kids. Now, in terms of showing up in being safe, providing a safe environment where our kids are seen and heard and listened to and understood, and that we're able to meet their emotional needs for regulation when they're distressed particularly. We don't have to do this all of the time. Actually, it's actually not helpful for us to meet every single one of their needs, nor is it actually even possible. What we should be striving for is showing up for our kids consistently. So that's seeing or identify their emotional need, that they need something from us, and it's our job to then provide that. But we only have to get that right, get that match between what they need and us showing up for them about 30% of the time. And I'm just going to pause there for a minute, because often there's a bit of a mic drop moment when I talk about this with families that I work with. We don't have to meet every single need of our kids, or meet all of their needs 100% of the time. And I'm going to go on and talk about in just a moment about how that's actually harmful in a way to their development. So this meeting of our kids' needs 30% of the time is what I consider to be good enough parenting. We're not, nor should we be striving for perfect, which is getting things right 100% of the time. Nor should we be striving for the other end of the continuum either. There does take a degree of effort and consistency in showing up, but we only have to show up and get things right in terms of meeting our kids' emotional needs 30% of the time. Okay, so what happens in the rest of the time, in the 60, 70% of the time, where we don't meet our kids' needs? And I'll just give you a little example of this, which I hope will resonate with many of you. Let's just think about the process of cooking a meal for dinner, and let's just say you haven't prepared it earlier in the day, so it's 5:30, 6 o'clock. If it's anything like my household, that's when everything sort of starts to get a bit loose and wild. School-age kids, toddlers, infants, even adults, I would offer, it's the same sort of process. We've all had big days, and that can be the time where that all starts to show itself in terms of some big emotions and some big behavioural responses. So let's go back to the kitchen, and you're preparing a meal, and you've got a little one at your feet. Might be an infant who's crawling around, might be like in my case, I have a 2.5-year-old who maybe hasn't seen me for much of the day and really wants me to pick her up and to be with her. But I'm focused on getting dinner done for the evening because I know that that's going to be really important in terms of getting them fed, and then we can get into the nighttime routine. So I'm cooking dinner, but my little 2.5-year-old Grace, she really wants to be with me. So what is she doing? She's crying. She's asking for me. She's literally pulling on my clothes, saying, "Mum, pick me up." So in that moment, as I'm prioritising cooking the meal, I'm not actually meeting the emotional need that she's communicating to me, which is for me to pick her up, to help soothe her emotions, and to be with her in that moment. So what we could describe this moment is as a rupture. There has been a need that she's communicated or demonstrated to me, and I haven't been able to meet that emotional need for soothing and for comfort and for being within that moment. So I hope if I give this example, that makes this idea of rupture and a little bit more real. What I want to then add on to the end of that is the process, which I think would happen for most of us, is once I finish the meal, preparing the meal I should say, I then pick up Gracie and I give her a cuddle and I talk her through, "I'm so sorry that I just had to get dinner ready. I'm with you now. Let's go," and it might just be that comfort and that hug, and that will be enough to soothe her. So coming back to those earlier points, I've made her feel safe, I've soothed her emotional state, and through that she's felt seen by me, that I've seen what her need is. And through that moment of repair, where I haven't been able to meet her need, I acknowledge that, I repaired, and I have helped calm her nervous system. So this might sound like a very hopefully typical example, but a simple example, but there is so much learning and power in those small moments. Because what this is setting the foundation for is those 4 R's that I've got on the bottom of the screen now. Resilience, a realistic relating to others, a map for relationships, and for regulation of emotions. So in that moment of me not being able to meet Grace's needs immediately, as she's 2.5 years old, she was able to tolerate that. Although it was uncomfortable for her, she could tolerate that for a little bit of time. And that then provides the scaffolding for her to be able to learn to manage her emotions as she ages and as she comes across more difficult situations into the future. So this is, I guess, the formation of resilience, regulation of emotions, But what I'm also setting up for her in that moment is the idea that, that we can't always have our needs met immediately, and we have to sometimes wait and be patient and delay gratification. But it's also setting up the example of that mummy doesn't get it right all the time, and mummy, sometimes might make mistakes. I maybe missed time doing the meal preparation, and that meant that I couldn't be as organised and emotionally available as I wanted to. And that's okay. It's not the end of the world, because we can repair things and close the loop. Okay, I'm going to pop off now and we'll go across to the next slide, where I'll talk a little bit more of what can get in the way of this concept of showing up in a good enough manner for our kids. So I'm really hoping that so far in this presentation, you're starting to process the idea of the importance of good enough parenting, in actually striving to be perfect parents, and whatever that actually might mean to be a perfect parent by your description, is it's not actually doing the best by our kids. What they actually need is to see that we are human, that we make mistakes, and that we can repair problems, or we can repair ruptures when they occur. And this is what good enough parenting is, and why actually being good enough as a parent is actually quite equivalent to being perfect, because it is exactly what our kids need. I'm also hoping that with that metric of 30% that you'd probably be saying to yourself, yeah, I think I get it right. I think I meet my kids' needs about 30% of the time, and I hope that that's actually being really reassuring for you. I also wanted to spend a few moments talking about, though, what can get in the way of us showing up in a good enough way, or 30% of the time, or what actually makes us vulnerable to that rest of that time where there might be ruptures. Now, the example that I gave you earlier, I guess, is hopefully a very an example that you can identify with, and it seems quite low level and very sort of naturally likely to occur in the natural flow of family life. I guess on the other end of the continuum, in terms of when we're talking about ruptures, what can happen is what can also be a rupture is when we I guess do, say, and act in ways with our kids that are outside of our value system, or how we would like to conduct ourselves as parents, or even more broadly as human beings. So this can be in those instances where we yell, where we threaten, where we might actually even act out, physically towards our kids, maybe by, being a bit too rough in restraining them from a dangerous situation, or maybe feeling so helpless in our attempts to discipline or to manage our kids' emotions or to set a boundary that we might actually act out physically towards them. These are all also examples of ruptures and things that happen in that 70% sort of range where we miss the mark. Now, it's these sorts of things which I guess most parents really, don't want to be in that space. And often what can happen when we're in that space where we've acted out in a way that's been a bit explosive or a bit reactive or a bit aggressive or a lot, as the case may be, is that this can often leave us feeling really no good about ourselves, and where we might swing to actually feeling less than good enough, and maybe starting to berate ourselves, to beat ourselves up for the things that we may have said or done or not done, as the case might also be, in terms of tuning out, zoning out, and not being available in that sense of the word. So this can lead to feelings of guilt or of shame, and my both lived experience and professional experience know that those feelings and those thoughts can be incredibly damaging to our own self-worth, our own sense of competence as a human being, but particularly as a parent. So it's important to understand, I think, what can make us vulnerable to flipping our lids in those moments, and of when we do and say things that aren't in alignment with our value system. And you might recall the diagram or the framework that I referenced earlier, the 𝒑𝒏 framework, and it really describes or conceptualises the importance of our mental state in being able to manage and respond to our kids and what they need. So to put this in another way, and using my own lived experience as a parent as well, is when it comes to the stuff in the blue and the yellow zone that I mentioned at the very start of this presentation, in terms of knowing what I need to do and what's important in terms of meeting my kids' needs, both in terms of consistency and routine, but also love and warmth and nurturance. I know what I need to do, and I know what's important. I know this stuff inside and out. However, that doesn't make me vulnerable to flipping my lid at times, particularly when I'm very stressed and when I've got a lot on my plate. And when I'm stressed, that makes me vulnerable. And I've just said it, and I'm going to say it again, that we flip our lids. So we lose contact with the thinking part of our brain, which holds all this knowledge and information and helps us down-regulate our emotions. And when our lids are flipped, we're responding from a more primitive part of our brain, our downstairs part of our brain. Our fight, flight, freeze response is enacted, and basically we're arming our body to prepare for a really significant event, which might be something, pardon the pun, as simple as a glass of water being spilt at dinner time. That might be the thing, again, pardoning the pun or the cliche, that breaks the camel's back, and we explode. And then all of our best intentions go out the window. So what I said a moment ago still applies, that this isn't necessarily damaging in itself. It's an opportunity for us to be, there's an opportunity in this for us to be able to repair that rupture. So when we've exploded in whatever form that might be, when it's appropriate, being able to come back to our child, and this relates to all of our relationships, but particularly we're talking about parenting today, to come back to our little ones and say, I'm really sorry that I lost my cool with you over dinner tonight. I shouldn't have yelled and screamed. Mummy's been feeling really stressed and I've got to find other ways to manage that. This wasn't your fault and you're a good kid. Something as simple as that is the cycle of rupture and repair being completed. So the other part that I want to take from this framework and really to stress to you in this context is the importance of looking after yourself, or your pink circle as it's described on this framework. Making sure that your cup is sufficiently filled to be able to meet the needs of your kids, at least in a good enough way. And I know that there's so much said about filling up our cups, and it's way easier said than done, particularly when we're holding so much as parents, as women in particular, and mothers trying to juggle work and family life, and the same for dads as well. So I'm just going to spend very few brief moments just checking in on a few points to keep in mind in that part of your journey. So to begin with, the simple stuff is where we need to start in terms of just making sure that we're paying attention to our nests, to what we're consuming in terms of nutrition, that we're doing hopefully some level of exercise or movement on a relatively regular basis, paying attention to our sleep cycles, our access to sleep, time alone, or it might actually be time spent with others, so connecting in there around connection, and what's the level of support that we have in our broader community to help us again navigate the very difficult challenges that is parenting in this modern sort of state that we live in at the moment. So I know you won't be able to always have all of those boxes ticked off, but just be mindful of where you're tracking in terms of those domains. Because again, if some of those domains, if you're missing some of those, or some of those are a little bit low in terms of being filled up, that this is what's going to make us vulnerable to flipping our lids. It's not because you're a bad parent. It's not because you don't know what to do. It's just that your nervous system is not functioning adequately. So once you've had to think about those foundations though, in those moments when we're dysregulated or shortly thereafter, it can be about tuning into what's going on in your emotional state and your body state, and using that as a signal to be able to tune into and say, hey, what's going on for me? What are they telling me? When I notice my heart racing a little bit, when I notice that I feel sick in my stomach or a tightening in my stomach, just taking a moment to think, okay, what am I actually thinking about? And stepping back, way easier said than done, but much easier to do when we've got those foundations covered. And just to finish off, I would like to just round off this class with a step through sort of process of when you have felt like you're experiencing big emotions, particularly in the context of parenting, knowing all of the information that I've shared so far, that it isn't a sign of being a bad parent if you flip your lid. It's generally a sign of feeling overwhelmed, feeling hopeless, feeling out of control, feeling like you don't know what to do. And this is when we can be vulnerable to do and say things that we don't want to, or that can be harmful to our little people. So in these moments, I just encourage you to step through and think about these sort of steps that I've got on the screen, tuning into when at some point noticing that you've actually really overcome with a big emotion. Noticing this, labeling it or describing it, building awareness in terms of actually acknowledging that in that moment of feeling a big emotion, you may have actually said or done something, as I mentioned, that doesn't feel so good. So trying to catch yourself then. And firstly, doing as I'm doing now, just trying to regulate your nervous system before you do anything else, doing some deep breathing, And then once you're a little bit more regulated, then just noticing what you're saying to yourself. And that's all it is, just noticing. I'm having the thought that I'm a bad mum because I've yelled, because I've allowed too much screen time, because I got McDonald's for dinner. And continuing to regulate, continuing to breathe in and out. Sometimes we might need to even take that a step further and more engage more active strategies to come back to the present moment, to put the lids back on, to soothe that fight, flight, freeze response and start to think a little bit more clearly. And then once we're in this much more regulated zone, then we can start to think about what's going to be the next best move. And that next best move might be an aspect of that repair cycle if there's been a rupture. Most importantly in this cycle, it's then trying to move into a place of kindness and compassion for ourselves, acknowledging that flipping our lids, losing it with our kids, there being a rupture with our kids is not actually the end of the world. It's not a sign that you're a bad parent. It's just that you're a parent, and parenting is hard. And this is one of the parting notes that I really want to leave you with. Parenting is as simple as it is complex. There is no rule book. There are so many complexities that we bring to it in terms of our own histories, our own experiences, our own life and the stresses that we're experiencing, and then the uniqueness of our kids and how that can change from one child to the other. So we just think we've got it under control and then something changes. So what I want to suggest to you is that if you can come back to this principle that the most important thing that I can do for my kids is be emotionally available for them in a good enough sort of a way, 30% of the time, that this can then really help you to challenge unhelpful thoughts that you might have of yourself, but also the opinions of others, that coming back to these science-based principles about what really counts. And then that can help you to have realistic expectations of yourself and of others, whether that be your kids, your partner, or other people that you're in close relationship with. So I really encourage you just to take a few moments now to just think about this information, think about what it means for you and your journey as parenting. What's one real take-home point that you've taken from this very, very brief class, and what can you do with that information in terms of taking positive action in your life and your family's life? I'd love for you to share that in the Facebook group, and I'll be diving in there, being able to provide some support to you over the next little while as well. So thank you again for joining me. I hope you found some thread of information really helpful from this, and I look forward to joining with you more in the future in your journey as a parent and as a human being. Thank you.